Welcome to lesson 10. We're going to be looking at JavaScript coding for the touch interface, device and operating system resources and more, particularly responding to the touch interface, code additional HTML5 APIs and access device and operating system resources. The agenda is these three topics here that you can see on your screen. First off, touch interfaces, second HTML5 APIs and third web storage API. First off, touch interfaces. So devices with touch interfaces have screens specifically developed for sensing touch. So there's two ways of doing this. One is with capacitive touch screens and the other is with resistive touch screens. Now, resistive touch screens operate with pressure that sort of sends the content location on the screen. So either a stylus or finger would push against the screen, exerting pressure, which would push two layers of the screen together, which would then register the area of the screen that's being touched. This sort of device tends to be cheaper and used in sort of older devices. Capacitive touch screens are what's generally used now, and it's based on the electrical properties of the screen and of the something which basically has to be able to conduct electricity that touches the screen. So normally your finger, some sort of conductive material basically. These are more accurate, so generally speaking a better option than the resistive touchscreen. Before we develop touch-enabled apps, we have to understand how fingers interact with touchscreen devices. So finger moves are called gestures. Again, these can include press, tap, slide, etc. The way that the application responds to the gesture is called a touch event. Okay, and then we can use JavaScript to create methods, to build methods called, for example, touch start, touch end, and touch move. Okay, so these methods would create these touch events. Let's have a look at some common touch gestures. You'll see in the table we've got gesture in the left hand column, then we have the mouse equivalent and a description. Often developers will need a mouse equivalent for the gesture when developing, because often development takes place, or usually development takes place on a desktop device or perhaps a laptop. So you need something to kind of replicate or sort of imitate that gesture. Okay, so we've got tap, which is a left click, same as tapping a finger on the screen. Then a double tap would be a left double click, which would be tapping a finger on the screen twice. Press and hold, mouse equivalent would be a right click, and selection or drag would be a mouse drag, and zooming would be the control on the mouse wheel, moving the mouse wheel forward or backwards. Okay, so that's the common touch gestures. The screen just provides a visual illustration of each of the 5 gestures that we've just looked at. Let's have a look at the touch event object and the touch lists and touch objects that are associated with it. The touch event is a document object model object, and you can see on the screen here that it is within a light blue rectangle. Okay, so the touch event object has 3 touch lists associated with it. Those touch lists consist of a number of touch objects in each one. Okay, and those touch objects will change as touch events happen within the application. Okay, so we've got touches touch list which consists of an array of touch objects. Okay, so there's one touch object for each finger that is currently touching the surface of the screen. And secondly, we've got the target touches touch list, and that consists of an array of target touches objects, one for each touch object that is currently in contact with the target element on the screen. Okay, and then finally we've got the changed touches touch list, which consists of a list of changed touch objects for every contact point that is associated with the touch event. Now, each of the touch object properties that we looked at in those touch lists on the previous slide has the following properties. Okay, so each one of those touch objects has the following properties. So there's an identifier, which is a unique identifier for the touch. Then you have the target, which is the HTML element that the touch affected. Then we have client X, which is the horizontal position relative to the browser window, and client Y being the vertical position relative to the browser window. We then have page X and page Y, which are the horizontal and vertical positions respectively, which are relative to the HTML document. And then we have screen X and screen Y, which are the horizontal and vertical positions relative to the screen. This slide really just explains the touch objects again. So a touch object detects input from touch-enabled devices. The touch objects are referenced in the touch list. Remember, there's 3 different touch lists for every touch object. It was touches, target touches, and changed touches. And the touch list track all points of contact on the touch screen. And a single finger touch has 1 entry in the touch list, while a 2-finger swipe would have 2 entries. Each one of the touch objects features the properties listed in the table on the right hand side there. These are the 3 touch lists that we talked about. So the touches touch list, target touches touch list, and the changed touches touch list. Okay, so I'll just let you read through the descriptions if you want to pause the recording here. Let's have a look at event listeners. In order for an application to respond to any touches, for example, that might take place on the screen, we need to add a way for the application to listen out for an event. So we use the add event listener method to attach an event handler to an HTML element. Okay, so the syntax for add event listener is as follows. Okay, so you've got the document, and then add event listener, and then you have, for example, touch start, then touch start handler, and false. Okay, so the touch start is an example of an event. Touch start handler is a function. Okay, so that is a function that will be called in the event of that event being detected. And the false in this example is an optional parameter which is called use capture. Okay, so most of the time bubbling is used, but that can be, the capture can be set to true if required. Okay, you can see some good examples of add event listener at that link on the page. A few things worth pointing out as well about add event listener. You can attach an event handler to an element without overwriting any existing, i.e. any pre-existing event handlers. And you can also add several event handlers to one particular element. Okay, and you can also remove an event listener by using the remove event listener method. I'm just including these gesture events here because they are described in the book, and they are in the Microsoft slides, but gesture events were not actually implemented into the standard. Okay, so at the time they were sort of discussed and as an option and included in some sort of draft documentation, but in the end they weren't actually implemented. Okay, so I'll just sort of leave this here, just so you're aware of them, but just be aware that they're not actually in the standard. A touch event is an action that an application takes in response to a touch. There's 4 common touch events. Touch start occurs when the user touches an element. Touch move occurs when the user moves the finger across the screen. Touch end occurs when the user removes the finger from an element. And touch cancel occurs when the touch is interrupted, for example when a new application is launched. Okay, let's have a look at HTML5 APIs. First off, we're going to have a little bit about the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group. So WhatWG is a consortium that was formed by Apple, the Mozilla Foundation and Opera Software to define and document HTML5. Okay, it's a different organisation from W3C, so don't get those two confused. And it has some sort of very specific responsibilities regarding HTML5 technology. So the WhatWG HTML5 specification includes the following additional APIs in its HTML5 specification. Okay, so they focus particularly on the geolocation API, the web workers API, WebSockets and file API. Let's have a look at the geolocation API. So this API allows developers to access the geographical coordinates of a user's device. So the geographical coordinates obviously include latitude and longitude. The primary functions of geolocation are, so it's these two here that you particularly need to be aware of. So get current position, which gets the device's current geographic position, and watch position, which tracks changes in position over time, generating events when changes occur. Let's have a look then. So get current position method is used to return the user's position, and there are certain values which are always returned. So the latitude, longitude and accuracy properties are always returned. There's some other properties as well which can be returned if they're available, such as altitude, altitude accuracy, speed, heading and timestamp. Okay, so if you look at the link on the page at the bottom of the page there, you can get some more information about the geolocation API, as well as get current position and watch position. There's also another method called clear watch, which is useful as well, which would stop the watch position. Okay, so in that particular example at the bottom of the page, you're basically just sort of creating a function called showMap, which will return the latitude and longitude of the sort of current position. Web workers are APIs that run scripts in the background, so they ensure that important actions are performed while users interact with the screen at the same time. So web workers pass information through messages, and they run separately from the main HTML document in a separate thread. Let's have a look at the WebSocket API. So the WebSocket API creates a simultaneous two-way connection between a client and a web server. This type of connection is called a socket, and it allows data to flow backwards and forwards freely. WebSockets are commonly used for real-time applications like chat, multiplayer, online gaming, or sports score tickers. There are three primary events that occur with WebSocket communication: on open, when a socket opens; on message, when a message is received from a web server; and on close, when a socket closes. So again, have a look on W3 Schools for a bit more information about WebSocket and some easy to use examples. The File API allows web applications to upload files from local storage to remote servers. The File API features several interfaces for accessing files, including File, which reads in a file as a URL; File List, which permits upload of multiple files or a folder of files; Blob, which stands for Binary Large Object, which provides access to raw binary data; and File Reader, which provides methods to read and display a file. The Web Storage API. The Web Storage API allows you to store data in the browser versus a server. So there's two different types of storage: local storage and session storage. Local storage lets users save larger amounts of persistent data, and there's no limit to how long that data persists. Session storage lets users save session state data, so that only lasts for the duration of that particular session. So once you've closed a tab in the browser, then that session storage data will be lost. Both objects allow users to store large amounts of data without slowing down the connection, because the data is transferred only when requested. How do we implement web storage? So we use the local storage and session storage objects with the methods in the table to manage the key value pairs. Okay, so the methods are setItem, which creates a new key value pair, and getItem, which would get the value for the specified key. RemoveItem would remove the specified key value pair, and clear would clear all information from the storage object. And again, the best place to look for more info on this, as I say, is W3 Schools. So you can add a key value pair to the session storage object by using the following format. Okay, so this is just an example of how that might be done. So use session storage.setItem, specify the key and the value, and you're creating a variable called myvar, which is the session storage, and then get the item key. You can add a key value pair to the local storage object by using the following format, okay, which works in a very similar fashion to the previous example. Any apps that you build will need to be able to access hardware on a device. So some of these capabilities are sort of global positioning system. So GPS, obviously it usually consists of a chip or circuit board of some sort, and basically is a receiver that communicates with satellites and returns a sort of position in sort of coordinates. And an accelerometer is a device that measures any change in speed or direction. The device motion event would provide the acceleration of the device in Cartesian coordinates, and also the rotation rate and obviously the camera will provide access to images and video and so on. So these are the topics that have been briefly covered in this lesson. So it's touch interfaces, HTML5 APIs, and the web storage API.